Welcome to Monarchist Minute. I'm William Stout, back from my very long time away, and I'm here with all my good friends this evening, Thomas Brightsworth, Clements Magnolia, and Frederick V. How is everyone this evening?
Hello, Will. It is good to be back, I will admit.
How is
Second
everything?
second episode back on. I'm feeling pretty great about it, especially because it's a very historical one, unfortunately.
Yeah, we all had a good week, I
Unfortunately,
think. Hopefully.
Yeah. Clements, how are you this evening? Clements seems to be unavailable to speak at this point in time, but he is here.
Yes, yeah.
Anywho, we have a very interesting, somber, and very controversial topic tonight. As of the date we are recording this, which is Saturday, June 1st of 2024, Trump was officially found guilty. Was it on Thursday where the verdict went through?
I think it was.
I think
I'm not sure if it was yesterday or it was the day before yesterday.
Well, anyway, Trump was officially found guilty, and so tonight's topic, and probably the sole topic for the evening, given how all-encompassing this will be Trump's trial, his conviction, and the consequences this means for politics and the political environment of the United States.
Yes.
Yes,
So,
yes.
one thing I often hear, I'll say it, both sides are pretty stupid to me. However, as I am very close to people who are in the same business as Donald Trump, albeit to a way lesser extent than he is, and a lot of complaints I hear about the Trump trials is that there was one, after a while of gathering evidence, there was only one specific crime that all the 34 convictions fall under, and that was falsifying business records. I tried to learn a bit from my friends about all this. And again, I'm no lover of Donald Trump. I really wish that we didn't have to choose between Malak and Bale every single election of our life. But again, this does seem, and everyone usually admits it, except the higher up Democrats, this really does seem like political maneuvering, manipulation, as well as a conspiracy. The thing that made me start realizing this was, again, I really stayed away from it. I pretty much think Trump is a bad businessman. The one thing that made me start considering that it's a conspiracy is when Sam Harris, who is one of the leading new atheists, he's a member of the Four Horsemen of Atheism, a Democrat who stands against Trump, firmly admitted on interviews that, yeah, this whole thing is a conspiracy by the Democratic Party. However, it was necessary for the good of the country. He even affirmed that this is a conspiracy, and a lot of Democrats will admit a lot of these convictions of the trial were very much the nicest word they'll say for it is sugarcoated.
Yeah, it kind of looked unrealistic, like, the guilty stuff, because I thought there'd be, like, not guilty on the other counts.
Well, that's the thing. You can be considered, it is quite common for a lot of cases to be considered guilty or not guilty on all of them. However, my concern primarily is that people are even admitting that it was a conspiracy, both Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, left, right, whatever. But they very much disagree. They disagree on what should be done about it. Because people like Sam Harris are saying it was a conspiracy, however, it's for the good of the nation. Sometimes you do have to play a little dirty to preserve the greater order. And that scares me.
It's for the greater good. The greater good.
The greater good.
I heard that day.
Such a good movie. I love that movie so much.
It bothers me because this goes into the ends don't justify the means.
Right.
I truly don't believe you can do an evil means of getting a good end. And that's my concern, is if the Democrats or the Republicans are willing to cross the lines of political professionalism and morality for the sake of quote unquote preserving the United States
democracy.
Yeah, exactly. If they're doing this for promotion of the quote unquote greater good, what's to stop them from going further? This is always how these supposedly great nations ended up falling to tyranny, is that they were told, we're doing this to protect your freedom. This is always the start of it, where they say we do have to get our hands dirty to protect you.
Dare I say, it's literally fascism.
Yep.
Fascism
Literally,
is
I don't know if I would say that is fascism, though.
I know.
And it's exceedingly
There you go.
authoritarian and it's conniving, but I don't know if I would. I certainly
I
not fascism,
know.
though.
I think a better word.
I just wanted to use the tagline as kind of a joke.
I think the proper word
yeah.
for it is Machiavellian. Machiavellian again. Machiavellian. Thank you. Sorry, my southern vernacular is terrible, but I will say it's borderline Machiavellian, where Machiavelli did believe, forget about the right and the wrong, forget about all that. The ends justify the means in politics. Get power if you can, and I do believe that applies to this because the Democrats are trying to stay in power, whether you love them or hate them. It's pretty obvious whether you love or hate Biden or Trump, either or. It has to be admitted that most of the American people are disappointed in the current Democratic government, the Democrat Party. And that is primarily because of, one, how terrible of a job President Biden has done, and two, the fact that the Democrats are keeping him as the main candidate and don't seem to have any other options.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's like
that is unless you're the former head of my county's Republican Party, when he always speaks about it, and it's just he always he
I don't
tells
know
he tells
about
us
that.
that hold on, let me finish. Well, he tells us that they're gonna replace Biden with Michelle Obama, and everyone just kind of looks at him like,
that's what I was gonna say.
Dear God, no.
No. My thing is, I think, and again, this might be a little conspiratory, forgive me, but there's one joke that was made on SNL Weekend Update that was like, President Joe Biden was asked in an interview if he was going to run for election next year. I think that was a nicer way of saying, are you going to be alive by next year? It goes into a
Are
little
you gonna be
conspiracy
alive?
theory of, I think the primary reason they want President Biden to be president, as well as Vice President Kamala Harris, is so that they have Vice President Kamala Harris running it, as well as keeping the Democratic Party up. Again, whether you love Trump or hate him, most people, including the majority of those who voted for Biden, whether in every minority group, etc., they are all now leaning much more to Trump. Not because they like Trump, but because they've pretty much felt like they've been failed by the Democratic Party. And I do think, yeah,
of course.
sorry, Will.
If I may, I have. Well, do you need to finish your thought, Thomas?
Oh, no, that's the most of what I'll say for right now.
All right. Well, I have two thoughts. My first thought goes to Clements, and that thought is, I don't think y'all younger folks realize just how horrifying to me the idea of Michelle Obama running for president is, because I don't know if you guys are old enough to really remember the Obama administration. I know.
Oh yeah.
he's
I remember
just
that.
for our audience to know, he's not even 5 years older than us.
That's a very significant 5 years, though.
I said you're not even 5 years. You're literally only 4 years older than me.
About
Yes,
I think
that is a whole presidential term, so I will give you that.
Hey, if it makes y'all feel better, I remember the day. I think it was the day President Obama got elected. I was watching this. I think it was on like one of the old kids' cartoon shows that had a monopoly on it, and they were showing like the two presidents with like a fanfare and everything, and Obama came up, and they said Obama won the election. I remember that vividly, and I was like, huh. Okay.
The first election. Okay, the first election I remember was the 2012 election, because we were living in Hawaii at the time. Wait, hold on, were we? The 2012. Actually, I think we had just moved to California. Yeah, we had just moved to California, and I had no idea what was going on. All I heard was that he was reelected. And so I thought, oh, people must like him. So I went, yay! And my dad looks at me, just the absolute rage in his eyes to say that his son had just cheered on Barack Obama, because my dad is a hardcore Republican.
Ooh, that is.
Although he told me he didn't like voting for Romney, though.
I am.
Oh.
If I'm honest,
The main reason at the time was because he didn't like that Romney was a Mormon.
Yeah.
Understandable.
Yeah, Mormons.
I don't know if I would like. I would much rather a Roman Catholic, an actual Roman Catholic president, not our current quote unquote Roman Catholic president that we have right now.
Wait,
I'd rather an
I
actual
can't hear
one.
any of
I
you
would
right
definitely,
now.
I would
much
definitely
rather an
support like an
actual one
Orthodox
than I
person
would
becoming
than I would a
president.
Mormon. I'd much rather an Orthodox or an actual Roman Catholic than I would a Mormon.
Oh, that was weird.
Now listen, I have friends. Like God, that sounded wrong, but so I have met a multitude of Mormons. They are quite frankly absolutely wonderful people, and a lot of them are really conservative. But I just don't know if I would vote for one for president. Okay, for like senator. Okay, yeah, because there's probably gonna be a whole lot of terrible candidates running. I'd much rather vote for
Yeah.
I mean, like I worked in I helped with campaigning for Ted Budd for the 2022 midterms, and of course his opponent was our former governor McCrory, and McCrory was he was basically a Romney.
But,
Yeah, another one of them
Sure.
Romneys.
Just listening to this, it feels like just sitting in a salon, but instead of talking about guys, we're all talking about presidential candidates. Like, oh, Romney is such an ick. That's what this feels like right now.
Well, here's something I want to talk about though, is the fact that I don't know if it was yesterday or a day ago, but in Germany there was what I've heard has been described as either a terrorist attack or an Islamic extremist attack in which a politician was stabbed by an Islamic extremist in the city of Mannheim.
I know what it is.
Giving a speech, yeah. And
it was during
I saw the video, yeah.
Yeah.
It was during an anti-Islam rally, as far as I know. It was one of those protests that were like, we don't want Muslims coming into Europe anymore because they are having a lot of mass migration into there.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
so
that is true. Europe
It's
has been
dangerous for us
facing a lot
to
of problems.
like the Islamic immigration is dangerous. It proceeds to get stabbed by an Islamic extremist.
But
It's a
okay,
self-fulfilling prophecy. It really is.
But the one thing I want to talk about though is the fact of just a photograph that came out of it from the video in which a bystander attempted to stop the stabber, and he pushes him away, and then a police officer proceeds to jump on the guy who had stopped the stabber, and then the police officer gets stabbed. Willkommen in Deutschland!
Say what you will about American cops, at least American cops are able to assess threats.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I don't think... Yeah, to be fair, that's not on the scope of today's conversation, but that is something that's going to have to be talked about, is the Muslim migration.
It's the Islamic immigration of Europe.
Yeah.
Yes, but however, there's something that quite interests me about this trial. I was thinking about it before the episode started.
If I may,
of course,
before we got off on the topic of candidates, I want to backtrack a little bit because I wasn't finished.
Oh, my bad, Will.
Oh yeah, but anyway, to finish my earlier topic on the Obama administration, I never really had an issue with Barack, but I absolutely loathe Michelle just because I remember back when I was in middle school. How my school lunches every year got a little bit smaller because of her whole health.
That's what I was about to say. Like the school lunches when she was the first lady, I was just like,
that is
what is this?
Yeah, I remember. I noticed. I remember.
This is why my summer camp lunches got smaller.
Yeah, I noticed the decline in the food quality and size after like a year after they came into power. I'm like, why did it all get worse?
Holy crud!
And the sole reason I'm traumatized by the Obama administration it has nothing to do with the man, just his wife.
Holy crud! That's why my summer camp lunches became crappy and small. It all
Yeah.
makes sense now. We used to get hot dogs and chili and pizza. Next, we got like bagged food. Oh my gosh, it's all Michelle. Oh, that
It
is
was
so
always
you
Yeah, you can
ever
thank
had-
Michelle. You can thank
Have you ever
Michelle.
had fat-free Doritos and skim milk? It's like drinking chalky water and eating glass.
yeah.
It's just awful.
Yeah,
But
this is
I
bad.
will say, because this is. Hold on one second. Say any thoughts y'all have before I continue, because this might be a little long one.
well, I posted this in Pics and Vids earlier, but someone made a list apparently originally devised by a major CNN legal analyst of all the problems with the Trump trial, and I wanted to list them real quick.
Yeah, of course.
First issue they found was that the judge was apparently biased. They
Yeah.
donated money in plain violation of a rule prohibiting New York judges from making political donations to a pro-Biden anti-Trump organization. Alvin Bragg boasted on the campaign trail in an overwhelmingly Democrat county that he had sued Trump over 100 times. Most importantly, the DA's charges against Trump pushed the outer boundaries of the law and due process.
Yeah.
Now, his fourth thing was the charges against Trump are obscure and nearly entirely unprecedented. In fact, no state prosecutor in New York, Wyoming, or anywhere else in the country has ever charged federal election laws as a direct or predicate state crime against anyone for anything, none ever. Which makes sense because federal election laws should be charged on the federal level, not the state level. That seems
Clearly.
logical.
Yeah.
The DA inflated misdemeanors past the statute of limitations and quote unquote electroshocked them back to life by alleging the falsification of business records was committed with intent to commit another crime, which we have no proof that that was the case, at least by my knowledge. At least not proof that was brought up in the trial. Granted, I've only read cliff notes on the trial because I haven't had time to keep track of the full thing as it's been going on for 3 months, it seems. Number
Mhm.
6 is inexcusably, the DA refused to specify what those unlawful means actually were, and the judge declined to force them to pony up until right before closing arguments. So much for the constitutional obligation to provide notice to the defendant of the accusations against him in advance of the trial, meaning that Trump wasn't necessarily informed of what he was being accused of before the trial.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a huge problem. Number 7, in these key respects, the charges against Trump aren't just unusual, they're bespoken. Seemingly crafted individually for the former president and nobody else, which basically points out that it's very much kind of a kangaroo court for the show trial. And
Right.
number 8, which is the final one, the Manhattan DA's employees reportedly have called this the zombie case because of the various legal infirmities, including its bizarre changing mechanism. But it's better characterized as the Frankenstein case, cobbled together with ill-fitting parts into an ugly, awkward, but more or less functioning contraption that just might ultimately turn on its creator. Meaning, basically, that the Democrats have created the perfect show trial, and doing that have created a legal precedent that might be used against them in the future.
I
Now,
will say,
Yeah.
my
Well,
takeaway
I'm
from this-
I'm just gonna say I exceedingly doubt it will ever be used against them in the future. Because if there's one thing the Republican Party has shown us is that they are not even slightly willing to try and break any eggs.
well,
They're
My-
absolute losers.
my takeaway from all of this is that do I think Trump did something wrong? Yes, fundamentally so. However, and this opinion, I've always had this opinion, and this goes back to the trial. Who was the cop convicted of killing George Floyd? I forget his name.
I don't know either. That's I really don't know.
I forget his name.
I
but
think
anyway,
I think it might be Derek Chauvin. I think
I think
that
yes,
sounds right to
Derek.
me.
yeah, it's Derek Chauvin. But this goes. I had the same opinion on the Chauvin trial. I think that they were guilty. I both think Trump and Chauvin were guilty. But just like the Trump trial and the Chauvin trial have in common, I do not think it was a fair, proper, and lawful trial. And I feel like this is something we have to remember going forward.
Mhm.
Because there's going to be the argument that people who say Trump's trial wasn't fair, and then they will immediately run and say they're innocent, or people will say they're guilty and therefore the trial must be in the right. I don't think that's the case. I think it's perfectly okay for us to say that Trump was guilty, but the trial was still rigged. And I feel like that is an important thing we have to say because
by Soros.
because then we can't have a false equivalency. We can't just say and that since the trial was rigged, that means Trump must be innocent, and that means that it doesn't seem like we're having an agenda when we say the trial was rigged.
Yeah. So, if I
he
may,
might actually be guilty on some counts, but
Right.
there's a lot of other counts that he might not be guilty of.
so here's
I mean,
the
oh yeah,
problem.
sorry.
Sorry.
I think it really just hilarious that when President Biden decided to post on Twitter just no one is above the law. And I'm like, wow, really? What about you? What about, dare I even say her name, Hillary Rodham Clinton?
What about the
What
Hunter
about his son? What
Yeah,
about
don't
Biden?
even
What about
mention
his,
her
what
name.
about,
because
yeah,
then
what
you're
about his
feeling
son?
guilty.
If I may, real quick. One, whether Trump is guilty or not, I really do believe that remains to be seen. He may be guilty, he may not be. The problem with this is not that he was guilty or not, it's that in the court of the United States and in all of common law, we have innocent until proven guilty. As far as I have read about the trial, as far as I have watched, they didn't have any substantial evidence to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Again, in cases like these, it is beyond a reasonable doubt, and they did not provide that. One of the claims they made was that the banks were hurt by Trump falsifying these business records. That was the main crime he supposedly committed. And the bank said, no, he didn't hurt us. He actually helped us. And two, there was apparently one of his attorneys. One of his attorneys were a person on the stand who was very much against him on this. On the stand, he admitted to stealing from Trump. He admitted to not telling anyone about the business records he made, which is what Trump was on trial for. He even said his wife didn't know. Again, it's very fishy. My problem is not whether Trump is guilty or not. I like a lot of people, but I will humbly admit when people do wrong. My problem is we don't know because there wasn't enough evidence and they abused it. Because even then, the bankers, the people who were supposed to go against him, didn't. They even affirmed that Trump didn't do what they're saying he did. He didn't hurt the banks. That was one of the claims, that Trump absolutely hurt these very successful banks. The attorney who was supposedly one of the ones going against him even admitted Trump didn't know anything about these business records. That's my problem. There wasn't proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And if that can happen to a former leader of our country, it can happen to anyone in the court of law. But again, as much as I am interested in this trial, what I'm interested more in is the precedents we have. Throughout all of history, again, we always have to tie something back to monarchy in this episode. There really isn't a case like this in any history before, I think even before the 20th century, where we had a trial like this. Maybe other republics have had trials in our time with their presidents. I haven't seen it. With monarchs, every trial you ever hear of a monarch, because Queen Antoinette, Queen Louis XVI, King James II, we all have
King
many other
Charles.
kings as well.
Charles.
Mary Tudor, Charles, yes,
His
Charles
Majesty
the
King
First.
Charles.
Yes, King Charles I and Charles II. Thank you. They were all technically put on trial, quote unquote. However, these were all they didn't have anyone defending them because
By
everyone
what
who was defending-
authority am I being brought hither? That's a
Yes,
quote from
if
His Majesty
anyone-
Charles
Authority.
No, not Charles III, Charles the First and Second.
I said Charles. Yeah, I said Charles
Oh, yeah.
first. I
But
said
the
that's a
problem-
quote. from him.
It's Charles
All
the
these
First.
trials of supposed kings aren't the same as, for example, our president. One, every king that was ever put on trial was never supposed to be. Other than England, we've always had The Europeans always had this mindset of their God is divinely ordained to some capacity, whether it's
Their
by the
king.
papacy, whether
Their
it's by the
king is
Bible,
divinely
etc.
ordained.
I'm going to get to it,
Yeah.
I promise. Sorry. However, it wasn't
In the
until
structure,
after the Enlightenment and the revolutions where they started putting monarchs on trial. But even then, they didn't have anyone defending them. They didn't have innocent until proven guilty. It was pretty much stacked against them. The
It was
monarchs
almost
could
always
claim,
a show trial.
yes, exactly. Monarchs
Yeah.
could claim guilty and not guilty however they want. However, their fate was sealed. Charles I was beheaded for England is one of the only exceptions, and even then it's a small exception. England is the only one who has always maintained, regrettably, that their king's power comes from Parliament, not from God, the Bible, whatever.
Well, we have
And
to remember that, and even
yeah,
with the trial of His Majesty King Charles, it was exceedingly unpopular, and the army had to block the majority of the parliament to get in, so that they could vote in that he would be put on trial, and that vote itself only had a majority by 6 votes.
exactly. And that's
Out of
that's the
out of yeah, out of
yeah.
a total of what is it? I think it was out of a total of 86 MPs that those ones were allowed into the parliament in the Rump Parliament. Only 46 of them voted either for him to be killed or for him to be put on trial.
That's
Mhm.
There was no precedent, and everyone agreed it was falsified.
And that's the problem here, is
Yep.
that I'm more concerned, again, I view things in wide scope. I hate viewing things in just our time, our country, etc. This isn't supposed to happen. And by supposed I mean, like, I don't just mean divinely ordained, I mean just human nature. Stuff like this isn't really supposed to happen. Because every time we've tried to do a trial for the leaders of a nation, it has never once worked out well. The only ways they have quote unquote worked out well is if the monarchs didn't have anyone defending them. They were all show trials. In the French Revolution, they definitely did show trials. For all that talk
Mhm.
about liberty, fraternity, and equality, the only ones who did not get liberty, fraternity, and equality were those who defended the king or the queen, including I think 200 or 300 nun martyrs of the French Revolution. Even they
Yeah.
were brutally executed for refusing to submit to the French revolutionaries. This is my problem, is that, again, even though England is the exception, even they don't have something like this. As far as I have studied, America seems to be the only one, as of now, who's ever put their great executive power on a quote unquote fair trial with a jury, with a lawyer,
Yeah.
etc. But even that was a show trial. If we can, I don't even know what exactly I'm getting to here. I'm just trying to encourage some food for thought that if we can't even in our country get the president on an actual trial, what is that to say about future leaders in future nations? Because
Yeah.
this isn't how it's supposed to
And
be.
you could also put former presidents on trial as well.
Exactly.
Other
This is
like
completely
Clinton or
unprecedented.
Obama or who
Well,
else?
he is a former president though,
Yes.
because you're
It's
not
just
allowed to put. The only ones that can put a sitting president on trial is the Senate, and like
exactly.
the House can put them onto the trial, and then the Senate is the one that actually is the judge, jury, and
Exactly.
execution.
But this, and again, I am, again, I am the theocrat, quote
Well,
unquote,
technically, though.
and I do believe in divine right of kings to some extent, as given by Pope Innocent III, Gregory the Great, Saint Gregory the Great, etc. But I will obviously have a more bias towards not putting an executive on trial. That's where I think this all just breaks apart, is if we can put our executive on trial and he succumbs to the will of the masses, and the masses being the uneducated populace of New York City who hate him and want nothing but to ruin him,
Well,
what's there to
not
say
all of the
about,
masses hate him.
oh, not all the masses, however, the specific trial he was at was always New Yorkers. It was a state trial. No federal government or anything had any say in it. The federal court could have done something, but that really isn't to be decided yet. Again, if our executives, if the symbols of our nation, which leaders will always be the symbols of a nation. I hate it when people say, no, the leader isn't. I've heard it. Leaders will always be the symbols of the nation. When you think of America, you think of either George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and probably Donald Trump. When you think of France, I'll admit, you think of the Eiffel Tower, I'll admit, but in England, you think of the Queen and King. If you think of Austria, you think of the emperors, the Holy Roman Empire. It's not different. We are not different than our ancestors. We're not different than our predecessors. Doing this will have astronomical damage to not only the credibility of our nation, but to the whole stability. Because if the president isn't even above this rule of the masses, who is? It's why I'm actively against democracy, because it never ends well. It never ends well. The only type of democracy, quote unquote, that does well is what Aristotle called politia, which is wise rule by many. But even then, he argued that politia should not last, and that's only for building up of a government.
Yeah.
Just some food for thought, in that this is completely unnatural in humanity.
Yeah, and not only that, looking into like, the Orthodox Church, a lot of church fathers actually spoke against democracy, saying that monarchy is better than any other constitution or this and that,
Exactly.
Well,
I've
the
seen
ancient Greek philosophers, if we look at Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, most of the great minds that came out of Athens had nothing good to say about the democratic political system.
right. And even then, well, first we got to know what democracy means. This should be a whole nother episode, but democracy has never had a positive connotation until the Enlightenment and beyond. And even then, most of the Enlightenment thinkers spoke out against democracy, even at its fullest.
Yeah,
Democracy,
like what was that guy, Hobbes? Who
yes.
wrote
Well, no,
about the
Thomas
Leviathan?
Thomas Hobbes is an interesting one because he does believe in authoritarian. He believes in social covenant, which will become social contract. He believes that people have a say and that the leader's power comes from the people, but that they can't take it away. But all these Enlightenment thinkers, very few of them talk about democracy as a good government. They say democratic values, which is a little bit different. Even the founding fathers said we are not a democracy. And when we talk about the Greek philosophers, democracy in its original context and its original connotation always had a negative effect. I believe ocracy means rule by in the Greek, akratia, and demos means masses, but in its original cultural context, it basically meant dumb mob or dumb many. And that's why democracy was always looked down, because in every culture until now, because we're so illiterate, even though we have all the media of the world, democracy always had that negative connotation. And again, there is a good quote unquote democracy called politia, but that can never last.
Well, since
Yeah.
you made the comment, we can still fail at democracy even though we have all the information in the world. I feel like this is a good moment for me to get philosophical and point out the fact that there's a very big difference between being smart and being intelligent. There's a very big difference between knowing things and being able to rationalize, reason, and
That's wisdom.
discern information from that.
If I may edit your words a bit, I think that's the difference between wisdom and intelligence. Intelligence, this is a kind of analogy I've came up with that, because I've thought about that many times. Intelligence is knowing how to use a sword, how it works, how to fight well with it. Wisdom is knowing when to use your sword, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so you need both.
Yes, intelligence is... You don't need intelligence to be wise. Like there is such thing in the realms of Christianity as the wise fool, someone who's not very literate in book smarts, intelligence, but is very much holy, the holy fool. You can be wise without being intelligent. You can be intelligent without being wise. However, being intelligent without being wise will always have worse effects than you imagine. Because if you don't have someone who can say, this is a prudent time to do this or to do that, this is not right, this is not wrong, an intelligent person can annihilate everything without any remorse because they're purely intelligent and not wise. Is this what you were kind of going for, William?
It comes down to discernment about
Amen.
not only knowing things, but being able to adequately understand and what's the word I'm looking for? Apply what you know.
Exactly.
Another good analogy of this is being smart is knowing that a tomato is fruit. Being wise is knowing that despite that, it's not a good idea to put it in a fruit sandwich.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
Oh, that's actually better. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I didn't think of
that
that.
is.
I didn't think of that. I would argue that smarts has to do more with wisdom, which again, wisdom literally means prudence.
Mhm.
That's what I think you mean more by smart. Am I correct? Being prudent with everything in your knowledge?
By being smart is I just mean knowing information.
Mm.
And another, okay, so let's look at it this way. Google is smart. The search engine is smart. The search engine knows stuff. But the search engine can't think. It can't discern anything from what it knows.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
AI, as far as we know, can never have the ability to do that, to create something in of itself. It doesn't have that creative aspect, nor that critical, doesn't technically have critical thinking as logical thinking, but it takes from everything around it.
And I
Yeah,
think
it isn't like a learning. It isn't like a thinking computer. It's a
and I
learning
think
thing.
and I think the difference between logical thinking and critical thinking is in order to critically think, you have to escape logic a little bit. And I've been really working on these concepts for another book I'm working on. I'm working
Another
on.
book?
I'm
You've written
working.
a book, William?
I've been working on a book since I was a senior in high school, and I'm still trying to finish it. But I'm sort of started brainstorming on a second book.
Gotcha.
And the first book is more a general political thesis, where the second book is going to be more metaphysical and philosophical.
Base, I
And
have that.
my main premise behind the second book is that for the longest time, we as human beings have defined our nature as being sapient life forms by our ability to reason. And I
Yeah.
think false. I do not think that's correct. Because all living creatures engage in some rational thought.
Hmm.
The lion
I'll
has
argue
to,
against this in a minute. Sorry.
well, the lion has to reason which wildebeest is the weakest and therefore the easiest prey. The deer has to reason based off of terrain, environment, and different factors where to find food. Even plants reason because plants have photosensitive qualities that allow it to track the movement of the sun and therefore can trace their growth based off of the movement of the sun. And all of these are rational in a very mechanical sense. And this is partly because I'm also trained in industrial engineering, so my idea of rationalization is being able to make decisions based off of information input, which all living creatures do.
Yeah.
My opinion, however, is that what human beings are defined on is our irrational thoughts. Those things that we do
Yeah.
that make no sense, that aren't necessary, and are completely illogical, but we do it anyway based off of an emotional need or desire to do so.
Yeah.
And one of my big, I guess you could call it a proverb referring to this, is there are many species that use the stars for navigation, but only human beings stopped and gave all the stars names.
Right.
If I may, Will, that is I'm gonna have to read that one day if you finish it, because that seems interesting. It goes against a lot of the established philosophy, but I'd love to read it. The only complaint I'd give to that, I don't know how much time we have left. One
Yeah.
complaint I'd give to that is I think that seems to misunderstand what reason is versus instincts. The reason all of the greatest philosophers and theologians have said animals do not have reason is not because they can't decide things. Again, decide is a weird thing. They are driven by their instinct, their strive to their will,
Yeah, of
their
course.
not will, their desire to survive and to repopulate. That is what survival of the fittest is. It doesn't mean being the strongest in the animal kingdom. It means producing the fastest and producing the best.
Well, I would
That
argue that survival of the fittest
if I may
is
finish my whole thing
inherently.
real quick. If I may finish my whole thing real quick. I'm
Oh
sorry to
yes,
interrupt.
sorry. I
So
apologize.
again, and basically the whole reason animals can decide anything that seems reasonable is purely for the preservation of their species on this
Yeah.
earth. And however, this is where I say this is why what reason is we can go beyond our animal instincts, beyond our animal desires. We can go beyond, far beyond. Animals cannot have do not have a concept of justice. They do not have a concept of good or evil. They do not have a concept of love, true love, hate, anger, apathy, any of that. They purely go by their will to survive. We, however, as humans, can and should not just go by what it takes to preserve ourselves and our species or even our families, but what is right and wrong in the objective scheme of things. Animals cannot do
Well,
this. There have been studies on the brainwaves of animals. None of them think like we do. The only closest one with our cognitive abilities through brain shape is one type of ape. However, even that similarity is very far fetched and it's nothing close to what we have. The ability
Yeah.
to
well,
reason isn't just logical decision making. It's, in a way, it could be considered irrational. It's to go beyond logic, to go beyond what we know and what we see, our senses, our instinct, to view things that are truly intangible but real. Like justice to us, justice, fairness, love, hate are all as real to humans as the food we eat and the water we drink. But it's something we can't grasp at. That's what makes us rational is we can see beyond this world. And that is something you will have to come up against when you're writing this book, because many people will go against,
well,
will favor what I'm saying over yours, no offense.
well, I appreciate your thought, but I disagree with you respectfully because I personally do not see anything rational with these ideas and concepts. And again, I go through my whole difference between rationality and irrationality from the basis of digital electronics and my understanding of machine learning and machine thinking from my own schooling. As you know, Thomas, I, as a profession and as my trade, I'm specialized in automation.
Oh, absolutely. Our professions do have a greater effect on how we view the world. A
Right.
carpenter will view things in terms of labor, a theologian will view things in terms of God, an engineer will view things in terms of mechanics.
So as part of my job, I look at understand how machine learning works and that's how I understand rational thought. So when I say irrational, I mean when human beings become irrational and why our irrational thought is more important than our rational thought is when human beings do things that aren't necessary for survival or even go in the face of our best interests or survival. It's inherently irrational because it inherently goes against any reasonable course of action. Like, a good example would be sparing someone who is threatening your life, choosing to sacrifice yourself instead of trying to save yourself. It is rational to want a desire to save yourself, to
Right.
preserve life, because that is within the human and the animal instinct of fight or flight. That is well within our interest. But to lay down your own life for someone else or something greater than yourself is completely irrational. There is no logical reason to do so.
Well, yeah, I guess, yeah.
Sentimentality in the care for whatever it is that's greater than yourself.
Well, then I guess, well, okay. Again, I look forward to reading this one day. I really do.
Right,
I'd
and
only give two critiques. I only give two critiques. One, very, very early on in the book, as soon as you can, define what you mean by rational and irrational. Because again, the concept of rational for all theologians and philosophers, because rationale goes into that, is based off of going against the animal desires for the greater good. And the way you
Hmm.
just described it does seem to be more Hobbesian, if you will. Like it's irrational to risk your life for others. Like, and from how you described it, maybe possibly. However, your average person reading that it's irrational to sacrifice your life for others will tend to view that as he's saying it's irrational to show true love, if you know what I mean. Because
Right.
love is, according
And
to that definition, it's irrational to get married because marriage is much more sacrifice, and it's actually more rational to do other things to preserve the human race, if you know what I mean.
Exactly, and I do expect to get some pushback because I am going to be going against the grain for basically throwing into the face of all past philosophers what it means to be rational. But I do think it holds an interesting course that,
It is interesting.
that maybe our idea of what rational thought is fundamentally wrong. And of course, a paradigm shift like this isn't unprecedented, especially if we look at natural science, like how quantum physics reshaped our knowledge of the universe practically overnight from Newtonian physics. So it's not that a paradigm shifting view like this is wrong, just as much as that all philosophy has been built since then off of a.
Well, that's where I argue, Will. Just a word of advice, and we'll move on very quickly. I'm going to want to discuss this another day. We all will. There's a difference between building off of something of a reform and a revolution, because what Nietzsche did, what the absurdists did, they completely revolted against any view of philosophy that others had. They didn't really build off of, as far as I've read, any philosophers before them, because they all found some intrinsic meaning. Even the hedonists thought there was objective meaning and pleasure. The point is, keep that in mind. Just keep in mind, there's a difference between building off of something completely revolting and revolutionizing something. And I'd argue that revolutions are most of the time, if not all the time, never good. That's just my word of advice, and I do look forward to reading this. It actually does seem very interesting. The way you described it, the way you described it with mechanisms reminded me of the opening of Leviathan, chapter 1, how it was talking about different cogs in a machine and how government actually is just a cog in a machine. It's pretty interesting, but yeah.
Now that you mentioned,
so about that, it kind of reminds me of a question that I was asking myself. In the modern day, would we be considered the revolutionaries while the Republicans are the reactionaries?
I don't see why not. Honestly, I don't.
I
would consider that the idea of revolutionary and reactionary being that conservative could be seen as subjective based off of whatever status quo is. I don't see why that couldn't be the case.
Well, again, I just prefer to not use the term revolutionary, because revolutionary means new. It's brand new, and political revolutions are always through violence. I don't really believe in that. There's a difference between a reform, a revolt, and a revolution. A revolution is just a revolt that has succeeded. They have torn down the whole order and are building up something new. A revolt is when you try and go against it, but you fail, and whatever happens after that is history. Whether you start your own thing or whether you go against it, whatever. A reform is working from the inside and out, or working from the outside to go in without any bloodshed, without changing every single fraction of that order. Like, again, the Monarchist of America has always stood out against revolution. It has always said, we've had to tell people so many times we're not going to overthrow the president. We're not going to raid the Capitol. Stop. Too many times I've had to tell people that. And that's because, one, many of us don't believe in revolution. We don't believe in violent coups. That would very much go against what we believe as monarchist. I do truly believe reform is what's best. Reform takes a lot longer time. It's a lot more work. It's a lot more draining. However, it does produce the best fruits. It's kind of like, I gave this analogy before. Society is like a house, and the bricks are the tradition. You will have a lot of bad bricks and a lot of good and some in between. If you have a mediocre brick, you take it out, refurbish it, put it back in. If you have a brick that just simply cannot be used anymore, it's detrimental to the whole society, you take it out, throw it away, and replace it. But you don't tear down the whole institution, the good bricks, the bad bricks, etc. You don't tear down the whole house for the sake of a few or a lot of bad bricks, because that throws away the baby with the bathwater. And that's where I argue that we shouldn't be considered revolutionaries, especially in a times like today where the FBI is on everyone's butt, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, but it does beg
Connor,
the question, would be considered that while the Republicans at the top are the reactionaries? Like
I
it would be similar to like the monarchies of the past being the reactionaries, but now the Republicans are.
I disagree because again, that could be seen as word concept fallacy or the not word concept fallacy, either that or the etymology fallacy, where we say that the original definition or the most literal definition is the true. If sure, we would be considered revolutionary for our ideas by just pure word, because revolutionary means to go against the social order or to try and go against a lot of it. Conservative means to conserve the natural order. Liberal means to try new things, etc., etc. But at heart, things are a lot more complex than just the simple definitions. We are not revolutionaries. One, because revolutionaries instill a new idea. Monarchy is not new. It's much older than republicanism.
Yeah.
It's much older than all these ideas. And again, even if by maybe technicality we'd be considered revolutionaries, we should always strive to not use that term. Will had one more thing to say. I think we should end it up here after Will's comment because it is getting pretty late for me.
right? But anyway, you mentioned Nietzsche earlier, and that actually brought up something else I was going to mention in this book.
Yes.
So, I'll be the first to admit, I'm kind of a fan of Nietzsche because I kind of like his arguments against nihilism involving the Übermensch, that even in a secular society, human beings should still find greater meaning than just pleasure, and that life cannot be inherently meaningless, and anyone who says life is meaningless has only failed to give their life purpose and meaning. Now, one of the big things I don't like about Nietzsche is he's fanatically atheist. And so
Yeah.
I had an interesting thought. Because the idea of the Ubermensch is supposed to be someone who's more human than human. Like
It's basically someone who it's someone who makes meaning for himself, who makes objective meaning for himself as well as others. It's meant to be a concept that okay, God is dead, religion is gone. We have to give ourselves put something in its place, and that's where the Ubermensch comes in.
Right. And I had this thought process because the idea of the Ubermensch is it's supposed to be the idea you have of what your best possible self should be. And so I
Not
had
only that, but everyone else too. The Ubermensch is supposed to dominate in the world. His ideas are upon everyone else as well.
right, but the idea is that what an Ubermensch is supposed to be completely subjective based off of what your idea of what the ideal human being should be.
Yeah,
And so
sure.
I had this thought, and my thought was there is no fundamental reason why a monk couldn't be considered Ubermensch. And I really had this idea that a monastic life, is possibly the most Ubermensch thing someone can do. Because first of all, you're denying all immediate pleasures by abstaining from any worldly thing, and
Yeah.
you deprive yourself of pleasure, of joy, in pursuit of a higher spiritual goal. And so you're already engaging in the self-denial and pursuit of a greater fulfillment
Hard to
later.
interrupt. I hate doing this. I have to stop you here because, one, as a Catholic, I study the monastics pretty well, and I have to say that completely takes apart the concept of an Ubermensch to fulfill it as something purely subjective. Because the Ubermensch, while subjective to the person, isn't supposed to just be you do you. Because one, and it doesn't relate to monk in any way. The fact that you're giving up joy, you're giving up pleasure, sure, as a monk, but they get greater joy, greater ecstasy in the spiritual life, and they don't just deny the spiritual life. They don't fill the meaning of their life by giving themselves meaning. They get it purely from God, purely from the church, or purely from their religion. Buddhist monks do this, and that goes completely against the idea of the Ubermensch, whose whole purpose is to fulfill the void of meaninglessness in a godless society. That's why I don't think the monk analogy works.
What I was going to finish is
Sorry,
that
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and of course, that's because when Nietzsche came up with his concept of Übermensch, he, being an atheist, came up with the concept from a perfectly atheist perspective. Now, where
Well,
I'm Christian, and I came up with the idea of if I were to create my own ideal Übermensch, I would want someone to be more faithful because I want to be a more pious person in my life. So my ideal best self I can possibly be would be a more pious person. And so my
I
thought process is that at least from my perspective, a monk would be the most possible Ubermensch person because they're they're denying themselves from worldly pleasures in pursuit of greater spiritual joy and satisfaction, as you said. They get their ecstasy from faith and not from worldly pleasures. That's
right.
part of the self-denial and
Mhm.
pursuit of a greater, higher goal for oneself.
Right.
But I also think there are some elements that especially if you get into like more hermetic monastic lifestyles, where there is, and you feel free to cut here for this, there is also a seemingly, and granted, not all orders follow this, but a seemingly selfishness too in abstaining from the world and cutting themselves off from worldly problems in pursuit of solitude and ignoring the issues of the world as a result. So
One,
I do
yeah,
think
right. You.
that monks are ideally Übermensch if you look at the idea of Übermensch from a religious perspective.
I guess it just two things. A lot of people accuse monks of being selfish. The reason they go into monastic life, one of the biggest things they're told, every monk is told this, or every person who wants to be a monk is told this. You're not going to join the monastery because you want to escape the world. Too many people do that and they don't let you in at all. Saint Benedict didn't let people in. No monastery actually lets people in because they want to escape the world. Because they'll find they go there purely out of love of God, and they also go for the sake of the world. Monks are required to pray for every single problem in the world. They do know what goes on in the outside, and they do require to. However, and again, sure, with all this, I can agree with that. However, I do believe that it's making the definition of Ubermensch, it's separating it from its original form so much. It's very much making it so, what's the word? Open ended or vague that you could drive a truck through it, if you know what I mean. I do think there's a danger in purely making something about oneself. And that's why I say if you're going to use any example for the Ubermensch, don't use the monk. Because monks don't do this for pursuit for them. They do
Right.
it for God. They devote their lives purely for God, not even just because of their soul. You get to a point in the spiritual life, it's a very rare point, where you don't really care what your desire is, where you don't think about, you don't care about your soul. You care purely about the glory of God, which will benefit the soul. However, your soul and your life come secondary. And again, that's my two main complaints with that is that a monk is a terrible example for any of the definitions of an Ubermensch. I'm sorry, it just simply is. Not to offend you here, Will. But
No, no,
two is
no.
that
I appreciate the
yeah,
criticism. I really do.
two
I don't get offended at all.
thank you. But two is that one, I don't think you can separate Ubermensch from its objective meaning. Well, again, I think Nietzsche was the one who came up with the concept. I don't really think it was a concept before then. Hitler tried to take it and make it something Nazi, but even that didn't work. I think there's a danger between separating something from its original source, if not reforming, because what you're saying here is completely going against the actual term of the Übermensch. If only by, if only adding a little bit left, which is the Christian part. The objective definition of the Übermensch is someone the literal not literal definition but the objective meaning is someone who makes meaning in their life as well as others in the absence of objective meaning. And as Christians we do have to believe in objective meaning. Maybe this is just my perspective, but I think it's true. You cannot be a Christian and claim to believe in the Ubermensch because the whole concept of it is in a lack of a religious world, if you know what I mean. That's my two main complaints, and we're about to have to end anyway. So that will be something we should come up with another day, actually, because I think there's one thing quite interesting that I really want to get into.
Mhm.
It's how does Nietzsche relate to Thomas Hobbes? Because I would argue that the Leviathan described by Thomas Hobbes is the Ubermensch, and I think we should get into that in another episode.
The Leviathan described by Thomas Hobbes. Well, the Ubermensch is an individual, whereas the Leviathan is supposed to represent society and civilization as a whole. So,
Sure. The Leviathan technically does represent that, but it also represents, again, Thomas Hobbes, as well as most monarchists back then, believed the king is the center of society. There is no society without the king, there's no king without the society. But the way Thomas Hobbes describes how the monarch is supposed to be really does fit the Ubermensch role. One, Thomas Hobbes argues that the king should be the final authority on language itself, as well as religion, politics, in every aspect. But then, again, that is something for a whole another day, if you know what I mean.
Welcome back.
agreed. And
I
I do.
post Phenom mod. We are playing in the one.
Interesting.
Anyway, I do thank you for your criticism, and I'll take that in mind as I refine my ideas and everything. I
Of course.
truly appreciate the criticism. I am not the kind of person who gets I'm not your normal intellectual where I will get mad about people questioning my ideas. In fact, I relish it.
Oh, I agree. When I'm still working on my articles, I'm going to try and at least finish one to publish this summer. Really depends. I'm going to be sending it to the MOA for criticism, don't worry. But either way, I think we're out of time. I think we're 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes above the clock. So, Will, would you end it for us here? I have a lot to do, and I'm sure we all do.
Right? It's been a long day for me too. So, would you all please bow your heads in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us of our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thy is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us this evening. We're happy to have you all here. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you're listening to it on YouTube or any of our services where the podcast is on, be it on Podbean, Spotify, etc. Thank you for your patronage and for supporting the MOA. We hope to see you next time on Monarchist Minute. May God bless you. May God bless the United States of America. And stay safe until we meet again. Good night.
God bless.